North Narrabeen in Sydney may be known for its surfing now, but in 1935, it was part of a long list of beaches that were affected by shark attacks. No one knows why there was such an increase in attacks during that summer season, and yet many people, unfortunately, lost their lives as a result. There was one great white shark in particular that was causing havoc for surfers, and people were warned to avoid the water to limit their chances of meeting such a ferocious predator. Unfortunately, people were not keen to heed this advice, choosing to tempt fate and enjoy their favorite hobby regardless. Little did they know, a shark was waiting for someone to stray into the water so that it could rip them to pieces, and if anything got in its way, then it would chase them as close to land as possible. People tend to forget about the horrific injuries that sharks can inflict, but the animal will always be around to remind people to stay clear. "22-year-old Herbert Macfarlane was a star in his hometown, earning fame and respect through his football skills. He was well known as an excellent athlete, as well as someone who loved to try new things. On March 5, 1935, he decided to try out surfing at the beach down the coast, about 45 minutes away, with his friend Colin Welsh. When they arrived at the beach, they were disappointed by the surf conditions, as the waves were very small, and with the tide coming in, they knew they would soon lose any hope of catching any decent waves. There were others already in the water, trying their hardest to make the most of the bad conditions before the sunset. At 5:30 p.m., the two friends got into the ocean and began to try and catch some of the waves, but they were breaking very far out to sea and settled before they reached any of the surfers. With the high tide, the water was much deeper, and a dark trench had been created in the sand below, perfect hideaway for a hungry shark. Colin refused to go past the trench, not wanting to risk what may be laying within the deep chasm, and tried to tell Herbert to stay in the shallows, where they could explore the rock pool. Colin knew what could be found in those deep waters, but Herbert didn't want to listen. The football player was determined to get some big waves and could see them further out to sea, so decided to swim out by himself. This decision would soon change the course of his life forever. He knew the water was getting deeper by how cold it had suddenly gotten, but even so, he had the waves in his sight, and he wouldn't be giving up now. The darkness was intimidating, but it would be worth it when he finally got to ride the big waves in the distance. Another surfer called William Hartle joined him for some time, where they assessed the waves about 30 yards further out. But even William thought it was too dangerous and refused to go. Against the advice of his new friend, Herbert decided to paddle out further into the dark sea towards the waves. He paddled towards the southern end of the beach in a last-ditch attempt to find a decent wave before he headed home. He continued for about 100 yards until he was alone in the water. No other surfers had bothered to swim this far, so Herbert thought he would be able to have exclusive access to all the big waves. Little did he know that he was now a sitting duck, the only prey in the water in the eyes of the predator lurking nearby. As Herbert stood on his board to ride one of the smaller waves, he was knocked from his board and dragged underwater. He was too shocked to realize what was happening, initially believing it to be a rock that he must have hit. He was quickly brought to his senses as a 4-meter great white shark sunk its teeth into his right leg. He screamed out in pain, his body on fire, as the shark continued to bite and tear at his body. It gradually moved up from his leg, seemingly trying to swallow him whole, but Herbert refused to die this way. He screamed out again, praying that someone would hear him and come to help him while he was dragged under the water again, fighting for his life. Herbert tried to pull his leg from the animal's mouth, but its grip was too strong, and he only succeeded in peeling more of his skin from his leg. He resurfaced, shouting for help. Luckily, his screams were heard by several surfers who began to make their way to him, hoping to help him before it was too late. William Hartle, whom he had left behind about 100 yards back, immediately began to swim in his direction. while members of the surf club on shore quickly mobilized to come to Herbert's aid, including John Barrett, Ken Harding, and Carl Reed, who were all 27 years old at the time. They raced to the shore and leapt into the water to try and get to Herbert. They didn't know him, and yet they still chose to swim through blood-soaked waters to save a stranger from a shark, knowing that they would likely be the next victims. John reached Herbert first. He was losing strength quickly, and by the time John reached him, he was floating on the surface, moving only with the waves as he was slowly being pushed back to the shoreline. John grabbed him by the shoulders and started to drag him back in, trying to talk to him as he struggled through the waves. All Herbert could say was, "I can't breathe," and "Get me out," as he felt himself weakening and knew he didn't have much time to spare. John continued to drag him through the water until he was met by the other swimmers who helped him the rest of the way. A blood trail showed their path through the water, and once they were on land, the surfers looked out to sea, only to spot the shark following them. It was following the smell of blood back to its prey, but finding that its meal had been pulled from the water, it hastily turned and swam back out to sea. If the rescuers had been a little slower, they surely would have been pulled down by the shark as it grabbed anyone that it could. It was a lucky escape for the rescuers, but now they had to keep Herbert alive. An ambulance was quickly called while the rescuers continued to try and help Herbert while they waited. They could see that his right leg was completely mangled, with most of the skin being completely ripped off, muscle and bone showing through the blood that was covering his entire body. They tried to wrap Herbert's injuries in towels to slow the blood loss, thinking that they just needed to keep him alive until the paramedics arrived so that they could pass the care to the professionals. The ambulance arrived quickly and loaded Herbert into the back so that they could try to save him. His vitals were failing fast, and they were concerned that he wouldn't make it. The nearest hospital was very far away, and they had to weave in between the traffic if they even had a chance of getting there on time. Unfortunately, many of the cars couldn't move out of the way for the ambulance as the roads were very narrow around the coast, slowing the journey down, which cost them precious seconds. The hospital had been made aware of the accident and was setting up the operating table so that when Herbert arrived, he could immediately be transferred to the right department. Sadly, this never happened. Due to the slow traffic, Herbert McFarland died just minutes before he arrived at the hospital. Minutes that could have been saved if the cars could have gotten out of the way. Regardless, the result was the same, and Herbert became the fourth shark attack victim of the season. The community was devastated when they heard the news about Herbert, as many members had offered to donate their blood to save the young man. Lots of seasoned surfers gave up the sport as a result of what they saw on the beach that day, saying that the horrific injuries that Herbert sustained were enough to warn them of what is out there. Fishermen quickly began the hunt for the shark, knowing that if it had gotten a taste for human blood, it would only be a matter of time before it attacked again, but they were never able to find it. Shark sightings were reported sporadically over the next few weeks, but the shark that killed Herbert McFarland was never found, leaving surfers for years to come with the fear of the man-eating great white shark returning with its sight on them as its next meal.